In this video, I will argue that the work for widening participation and inclusion makes you a better educator. One reason why I wanted to mention this is that this is one of the Center of Teaching and Learning's profile areas. Universities and other institutions of higher education, as well as we as educators, have a responsibility to create good conditions for the widening participation of diverse students, as well as working towards student inclusion. This responsibility comes from the realization that the universities have long marginalized and hindered certain people from attaining a degree in higher education, which in turn has limited their opportunities to pursue education and research in universities or other institutions of higher education. Especially in the 1960s, universities had to take into account political currents that sought justice for marginalized peoples in society. Largely due to student activism, they began to reevaluate their teaching, research, and structures to take into account post-colonial, racial, gender, disability, and sexuality perspectives, just to mention a few. As a result, there was an increased effort to work towards widening participation and inclusion. Also, we need to recognize that there have been strong economic incentives to increase the workforce with capable and competent people in order to, just to mention one thing, sustain economic growth. By widening the pool of people who can participate in higher education, you are accordingly expanding the workforce. For that reason, efforts have been made to implement widening participation and inclusion in various ways internationally. However, I take Sweden then as an example. In Sweden, the issue of widening recruitment, then, the idea that more people should be able to attain a higher education degree, has been an influential issue in higher education since the early 2000s. The following formulation in Swedish Higher Education Act came into force in 2002, which says, higher education institutions shall actively promote and widen recruitment to higher education. What was meant by widening recruitment was ambiguous. However, it was generally interpreted at the time to mean that higher education institutions aim to increase recruitment among socially marginalized citizens and ethnic minorities. In 2001, the Department of Education report stated that stated that all people in a democratic society have a right to knowledge. Thus, instead of higher education belonging to a privileged elite, higher education would become open, meaning that it should welcome everyone regardless of background, ethnicity, place of residence, gender, or disability. The diversity that exists in society must be reflected to a greater extent in higher education, both in terms of students, educators, and researchers. An open university is open to the outside world. Recruitment to higher education should therefore be increased, equalized, and extended to new groups. This was from the Department of Education, a statement from them. And if you look at international documents all over the world, you can find similar wordings in their documents. However, the emphasis on getting more students from diverse backgrounds and needs highlighted another challenge. These people potentially have special needs or come with specific experiences that affect teaching in some way. Therefore, it was also necessary to think about how we organize the teaching so that those who come to us can take part in it on equal terms with everyone else. And there are various practical and theoretical perspectives that contribute to this kind of idea. We talk about things like blended learning or universal design for learning, just to mention a few examples. In the course Educating for Widening Participation and Inclusion, you will explore the conditions for inclusion in education, as well as how education can be made more equitable through relevant educational practices. And that's a course that was taken in the third semester, if I'm not mistaken. You may have different opinions on this than I do, and I want you to challenge my position in one of our sessions or in private. But for me, it is a great sadness that we are now seeing voices questioning that we see voices that question equitable educational efforts, that they are given space in higher education. While efforts towards widening recruitment and participation should be subject to critical scrutiny, as we should with everything else that we do, I am concerned about the rise of such cultural and political currents that question inclusivity as a value at all. I believe that there will be reason to return to this trend later on during the course of the program. But nevertheless, it is worth pointing out that the Center for Teaching and Learning has as part of its mission to contribute to inclusivity at Malmö University. Most of the educators in the master's program that you will meet work more or less exclusively with teaching and learning in higher education then, but we also have other colleagues that you won't see who work with inclusivity at Malmö University. They do this in several different ways. Among other things, they work with internationalization. They work with students who do not have Swedish as their native language and therefore arrange courses where they can learn to become more proficient in Swedish. They also arrange writing workshops where, for example, neurodivergent students can get support in their writing. They also arrange so-called introductory courses where new students can learn practices that are essential within an academic learning environment. Just to mention a few examples of the great work that they're doing. The goal of all of this is therefore to help students in their studies by taking into account their special needs and their experiences. But it's also the responsibility of educators at the university to make their teaching more inclusive. So one way you can do this is by understanding that the great diversity of students you teach, their experiences and needs, as well as being willing to teach in a way that is inclusive of these experiences and needs. This doesn't mean that your teaching will become worse or you're so to say dumb it down, so to speak. Instead, it's about taking responsibility for your own teaching by learning how to make your teaching more inclusive, which we will do in the course on widening participation and inclusion. So, recognizing the Center of Teaching and Learning's inclusivity profile, part of the discussion on how to become a better educator should therefore be to try to take responsibility for the students you teach by striving to make their needs and their experiences to take them into account when teaching. But these issues will be addressed further then in the course on why educating for widening participation and inclusion. So finally, I would like to go into one of my pet peeves, my areas of interest when it comes to quality in teaching, the educator as a role model. So see you in the next video.